The night had arrived, and with it, Isabella's dream was finally coming true. The stage lights illuminated her figure as she held the microphone with slightly trembling hands. The sound of applause echoed like a distant, almost unreal hum, as she gazed out at the sea of faces stretched before her. It was her first major concert, her debut in front of an audience of thousands. At last, after years of sacrifice, of endless days and sleepless nights full of doubt, the moment had arrived. The sparkle in her eyes said it all. She had been born for this. Vitor, her manager, watched her from the side of the stage, nodding proudly. He had witnessed Isabella's growth from her early days performing in small bars and local competitions to this very night, on one of the city's most prestigious stages. He had always believed in her talent, in her unique voice that could stir mountains of emotion. But now, at this precise moment, he knew her true journey was only just beginning. The first notes of the music began to play, and Isabella, breathing deeply, let the rhythm take her over. With each word that left her lips, it was as if she connected with every person in the crowd. The energy in the room was palpable, a mixture of admiration, enthusiasm, and pure devotion to the rising young star. But inside her, a small flicker of nervousness still hid. It was the pressure of knowing that this was only the beginning, that with fame came responsibilities she didn't yet fully understand. When the last song came to an end, the crowd erupted in applause. Isabella smiled, her heart racing, and she stepped off the stage feeling a mixture of euphoria and exhaustion. Behind the curtains, Vitor greeted her with a quick hug and a gesture of approval. "You were incredible," he said, patting her shoulder softly. "This is just the beginning. Didn't I tell you? You're going to be a star." Isabella nodded, still processing the magnitude of what had just happened. Everything she had ever wished for now seemed within reach. But something in the back of her mind unsettled her, a small voice warning that from now on, her life would change forever. "I have to keep this up, right?" she asked, trying to hide her insecurity. "I can't afford to fail." Vitor smiled, but his eyes held a seriousness that didn't escape Isabella's notice. "Success is just the first step. Keeping it is the hardest part, but I trust you. That said, you'll have to follow the pace I set. The competition is fierce, and there's always someone waiting to take your place if you let your guard down." Before Isabella could respond, a figure emerged from the darkened hallway. It was Renata, a powerful music producer, known for catapulting several stars to international fame. Her presence commanded respect, and when her eyes landed on Isabella, it was as if an electric current filled the air. "Well, well," Renata said, crossing her arms. "So, this is the famous Isabella everyone's talking about. I have to admit, you exceeded my expectations." Isabella felt a small knot form in her stomach, though she couldn't pinpoint why. Renata radiated power, and that intimidated her a bit. "Thank you," Isabella replied, forcing a smile. "I'm excited about what's coming next." Renata observed her for a moment, as if evaluating every aspect of her, from her appearance to the way she moved. Finally, she offered a smile that seemed more calculated than genuine. "What's coming is big, but it's also tough. I've seen a lot of girls like you, full of talent, but only a few survive in this world. Fame isn't as pretty as it looks from the outside. If you choose to continue down this path, you need to be prepared for what that means." Renata's words echoed in Isabella's mind like a warning. She knew the music world was complicated, but she hadn't stopped to think about all the implications. For her, up until that moment, success had been about music, about her passion for singing and creating. However, Renata's warning hinted at something much darker. "I'm ready," Isabella said at last, though deep down, she wasn't entirely sure. "I've always wanted this. I'm not going to turn back now." Renata smiled again, this time in a way that left no doubt she had something else in mind. "I hope so, dear," she said, her tone enigmatic. "Because in this business, sometimes you have to make sacrifices you hadn't considered. But don't worry, with my help, you'll go farther than you ever imagined." With those words, Renata handed Isabella a business card. "Let's talk soon. I think we can do great things together." As Renata walked away, Vitor moved closer to Isabella, looking at her cautiously. "Be careful with her," he warned in a low voice. "Renata has a lot of influence, but she doesn't always play fair. Take your time before making any decisions." Isabella nodded, but the doubts had already started swirling in her mind. Was this really what she wanted? Was it worth sacrificing part of herself for success? She didn't know, but one thing was certain: the price of fame would not come cheap. At the end of the night, as the stage lights dimmed and the crowd dispersed, Isabella stood alone, staring at her reflection in a mirror lit by small bulbs. There, facing herself, she began to realize that while she had taken the first step toward her dreams, she was about to enter a world where everything had a price, even her own identity. Isabella leaves the room with Renata's card in hand, knowing that a crucial decision is approaching. What she doesn't yet imagine is how profoundly that decision will change the course of her life. The weeks following Isabella's big concert were a whirlwind of activity. Interviews, photo shoots, autograph signings. Everything was happening so fast that she could barely process what was going on. Her phone was constantly ringing, and her face appeared on the covers of the country's top magazines. Everyone was talking about her, and the music industry already considered her the next big pop sensation. But even though success seemed overwhelming, Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing inside her, something she didn't fully understand. Renata had kept her promise. From the day she handed Isabella that business card, she had become a constant presence in her life. Renata introduced her to the top producers, songwriters, and stylists in the industry. Isabella's image was being transformed little by little, almost without her realizing it. Her songs started to sound more commercial, more polished, less personal. Music, which had always been her refuge, now felt like a manufactured success machine, and she felt increasingly distanced from the lyrics she was singing. One day, during a photo shoot for a fashion campaign, Isabella looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized who she saw. She was wearing heavy makeup, an elegant dress she hadn't chosen, and her hair had been styled in a way she'd never imagined. Renata watched from a corner, chatting with the photographer and reviewing the shots on a tablet. Everything seemed controlled, as if every move Isabella made was carefully planned. "You look fabulous," Renata said as she approached to inspect one of the photos closely. "This is just the beginning of what we can achieve together. With this new image, you'll go much further. The world doesn't know what's coming." Isabella forced a smile. She felt a kind of disconnect between the person she saw in the mirror and who she really was. Her style, her essence, the things she had always loved about music, were slowly fading away, and although she knew her career was taking off, she couldn't help but feel trapped in a cage of other people's expectations. "Don't you think it's too much?" she asked timidly, almost seeking Renata's approval. Renata raised an eyebrow and looked at her with a mix of surprise and disapproval. "Isabella, darling, in this world there's no room for doubt. If you want to be a star, you have to trust me. People want to see something extraordinary, something that makes them dream. And you, my dear, can be that. But you need to let me guide you." Isabella nodded, though inside, a small voice kept shouting. She remembered the days when she would write her own songs in her room, singing from the heart, without worrying about what others thought. But those days seemed far away, almost like a dream that was slipping away. Weeks passed, and Isabella became more and more immersed in the routine of the industry. She signed contracts without reading the fine print, trusting Renata and her team blindly. Vitor, on the other hand, was becoming increasingly concerned about the direction her career was taking. The relationship between them, once close, was now strained by Renata's growing influence. Vitor had tried to talk to Isabella on several occasions, but something always interrupted them. A new photo shoot, a recording session, a meeting with record label executives. Finally, on a rainy afternoon, Vitor found a moment alone with Isabella in the recording studio. While the technicians adjusted the equipment, he sat next to her on the couch and spoke quietly, trying not to alarm her. "Isabella, do you realize what's happening?" he said, his tone serious. "You're letting Renata take control of everything. I know it seems tempting, but you have to remember why you started singing. You can't lose yourself in all this." Isabella looked at him, surprised by the seriousness in his voice. She knew Vitor cared about her, but she couldn't deny that something inside her was also struggling against the direction her career was taking. "It's only temporary, Vitor," she replied, trying to convince herself. "This is all part of the process. I have to make some sacrifices to get where I want to be." Vitor sighed, knowing there was something deeper Isabella wasn't seeing. "It's not just about sacrifices. You're losing control, Isabella. The music you're recording isn't yours anymore. Do you really want this? Or is it what Renata wants for you?" Vitor's words hit her like a punch to the stomach. For months, She had tried to ignore that small voice inside, the one that told her something was wrong. But now, sitting across from Vitor, she couldn't avoid facing the truth. Everything she had loved about music seemed to be slowly disappearing, and in its place, there was a version of herself that she didn't recognize. Before she could respond, Renata entered the studio, bringing with her an air of authority. Vitor stood up, giving her a firm look, but he knew it wasn't the time to argue. "Everything's ready for the recording," Renata said, ignoring the tension in the room. "Isabella, darling, we're going to make magic today. I have a couple of tweaks I want you to try on the song. Nothing major, just small changes I think will make it sound more commercial." Isabella nodded, but her mind was miles away. As she stepped into the recording booth, she felt something inside her break. She knew the music she was about to sing wasn't really hers. It was Renata's creation, the industry's creation. Something designed to sell, not to express what she truly felt. When the first notes began to play, Isabella closed her eyes and tried to lose herself in the music. But this time, the connection wasn't there. She sang, yes, but she didn't feel the words. It was as if an invisible barrier was separating her from what had once been her passion. At the end of the session, Renata was ecstatic. The producers applauded, and everyone in the room seemed excited about the result. But Isabella felt nothing. As she took off her headphones, she looked at Vitor through the glass, and for the first time, she saw the concern in his eyes that she had been ignoring for so long. As Isabella leaves the studio, she receives a message from a journalist asking about her relationship with Renata and her new style change. Suddenly, rumors about her personal and professional life begin to spread, and she realizes that her image is no longer in her control. Will Isabella be able to reclaim her identity before it's too late? The constant noise of camera flashes and the incessant questions from reporters had become part of Isabella's daily life. Every time she tried to leave her house, there was a group of photographers waiting to capture even the smallest gesture, the most innocent expression that could be turned into a sensational headline. She wasn't used to that level of attention, and although she initially thought she could handle it, she was starting to feel suffocated. The questions about her relationship with Renata were becoming more uncomfortable. Rumors suggested that the producer wasn't just controlling her career, but also her personal life. People whispered that Renata had begun interfering in her most intimate decisions, from who she could socialize with to what she could say in public. Isabella tried to ignore the comments, but the headlines flooded social media, and worse, her fans began to divide between those who supported her and those who criticized her for selling her soul. One morning, while having breakfast alone in her apartment's kitchen, she received a call from Leo, a friend and fellow musician she had met in her early career days. Leo had always been a confidant, someone she trusted completely. His tone over the phone seemed relaxed, but something in the way he spoke made her uncomfortable. "Isabella, we need to talk," Leo said after a few minutes of superficial conversation. "Sure, tell me, is everything okay?" she replied, unaware of what was coming. Leo paused, and then, in a more serious tone, continued. "I've heard things, rumors. People are saying that Renata has you trapped, that you're not the same anymore. Isabella, you know I care about you, but I need to know. Is all of this true?" Leo's words hit her hard. She knew there were whispers, but hearing someone so close question her integrity hurt more than she had imagined. "Leo, I don't know what you're talking about," she replied, her throat tightening. "Renata has helped me a lot, but everything I do is still my decision." Yet even as she said it, she couldn't shake the feeling that those words weren't entirely true. "Whatever you believe, Isabella, just be careful. Fame is a beast, and the people around you don't always have the best intentions," Leo said, lowering his voice. The conversation ended abruptly, and as Isabella hung up, she stared at her cold coffee, feeling like her life was spiraling out of control. Deep down, she knew Leo was right. Renata wasn't just shaping her career, she was shaping her entire life, and it was becoming harder and harder for Isabella to tell the difference between what she wanted and what Renata wanted for her. The day continued with more interviews and calls, but something had changed within Isabella. The weight of fame, the criticism, and the rumors were beginning to crush her. As the afternoon wore on, her phone rang again. This time, it was Vitor. "We need to talk in person," he said firmly. "There's something you need to know." When Isabella arrived at the recording studio, where Vitor had asked to meet, her heart was pounding. She knew something serious was about to happen. Upon entering, Vitor was sitting in one of the chairs in front of the sound console, a grave expression on his face. "What's going on, Vitor?" she asked, concerned. He took a deep breath before answering. "I've been hearing things in the industry, Isabella. I didn't want to believe them at first, but someone in your circle is leaking information to the press. And I'm not talking about gossip. I'm talking about personal details, things you've shared in confidence." Isabella felt the ground fall out from under her. "Who?" she began to ask, but the answer was already forming in her mind. Vitor looked at her with compassion. "Leo." The name echoed in the empty room. Isabella couldn't believe it. Leo, her friend, her confidant. The same person who had called her that morning with a concerned voice, had been selling her personal life to the press for attention in his own career. "No, it can't be," she whispered, feeling the weight of betrayal descend upon her like a heavy fog. "Why would he do something like that?" "Everyone wants something, Isabella," Vitor replied, his tone weary. "Fame can corrupt even those closest to you. I'm sure Leo saw an opportunity, and he took it." Vitor's words unleashed a torrent of emotions inside her. Leo's betrayal, Renata's control, the constant pressure from the industry. It all started crashing down in her mind. She felt like the whole world was against her, like she couldn't trust anyone anymore. "What do I do now?" she asked quietly, feeling a deep sense of desperation. Vitor stood up and walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "The first thing you need to do is distance yourself from people who don't have your best interests at heart. And that includes Renata. She may be powerful, but she doesn't have total control over your life unless you let her." Vitor's words sparked a moment of clarity. For the first time in a long while, Isabella realized that she had been giving control of her life to others without even realizing it. But now, after everything that had happened, it was time to start taking it back. That night, Isabella returned to her apartment, but she wasn't the same. She felt the weight of lies and betrayal, but she also felt a new determination. She knew she would have to face Renata, Leo, and the industry that seemed intent on consuming her. But she also knew that if she didn't act now, she would lose everything she had worked for. Isabella decides to confront Leo, but she discovers that the rumors have reached higher levels in the industry. Her image is at stake, and the decisions she makes in the coming days could define her future. The weeks following the revelation of Leo's betrayal were hell for Isabella. Every day was a battle against herself and the media storm that relentlessly pursued her. The sensational headlines no longer just talked about her supposed relationship with Renata. They also delved into intimate details of her life that Leo had leaked to the press. Everything was exposed: her insecurities, her fears, even private moments she never imagined would come to light. The real Isabella, the young woman passionate about music, seemed to be disappearing under the weight of fame and lies. Trying to maintain a facade of normalcy was becoming increasingly difficult. Though she continued attending professional commitments, concerts, interviews, photo shoots, her mind was elsewhere. The camera flashes blinded her, the applause no longer had the same effect, and the journalists' words blurred into a constant background noise. Isabella was beginning to feel as if she were in free fall, unable to control the direction of her life. One night, after a live performance, Isabella collapsed in her dressing room, exhausted, not just physically but emotionally. She was alone, with the dim lights of the mirror reflecting an image of herself that she barely recognized. How had she gotten to this point? At what moment had she lost control? "I can't do this anymore," she murmured to herself, her voice cracking as she clumsily wiped off her makeup. Suddenly, the sound of the door opening pulled her from her thoughts. Vitor entered with a determined stride, but his expression was one of pure concern. He knew something was wrong. He had seen it in recent days: the disconnection, the lack of energy, the sadness hidden behind every smile Isabella tried to put on. "Isabella, we need to talk," he said, sitting down in front of her. "You can't keep going like this." She lifted her gaze, but said nothing. She simply let the tears she had been holding back for weeks roll down her cheeks. Vitor sighed and handed her a tissue, knowing that this moment had been inevitable. "Look at you," Vitor continued, his tone soft but firm. "You're destroying yourself from the inside. This isn't the Isabella the first knew, the one who loved music above all else. You can't keep letting yourself be consumed by this industry and by people who only see you as a commodity." Isabella clutched the tissue in her hands, her fingers trembling. Vitor's words echoed in her mind. He had always been by her side, supporting her from the beginning, but now she felt more distant from herself than ever. She had allowed everything around her to shape her, and she no longer knew who she was. "I don't know how to get out of this," she finally confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "Everything is out of control. Renata, the media, the expectations. I'm not me anymore. I'm just what they want me to be." Vitor looked at her with a mix of sadness and compassion. "Renata has a lot of influence, I know. But no one has absolute power over you, Isabella, unless you let them. Fame can be destructive if you don't set boundaries. And you've let everything consume you." "It's not that simple," she replied, wiping away her tears. "If I leave Renata, I lose everything. My career, my music, everything." Vitor shook his head, determined to make her understand what really mattered. "You won't lose everything. The only thing you'll truly lose are the people who don't value you for who you are. If you keep going like this, Isabella, what you'll lose is far more important: yourself." Vitor's words hit hard, as if they had pierced through all the layers of doubt she had accumulated over the past months. She knew he was right. She knew that if she continued down this path, she wouldn't just lose her career, she would lose her identity. Isabella stood up from the chair, feeling something inside her beginning to shift, but she didn't know if she had the strength to face everything that was coming. It wasn't just Renata, it was the media, the rumors, the expectations. The weight of being a star in a world that doesn't forgive. That same night, as she tried to sleep in her empty apartment, doubts overwhelmed her. She felt trapped in a golden cage, built by her success and her own fears. Fame, which she had once longed for, now felt like a prison. Her phone vibrated on the nightstand. It was a message from Renata. "Tomorrow we have an important meeting with the record label. I need you to be ready. It's a big project, we can't afford to fail." The message read. Isabella read it over and over, feeling the words, "we can't afford to fail," stabbing into her chest. When had everything become a matter of success or failure? There was no longer room for music, for art, for enjoyment. Everything had become a cold, calculated machine. The next morning, Isabella sat in front of the mirror once again. The makeup, the perfectly styled hair, the designer clothes. Everything was in place, but the image she saw wasn't hers. It was a creation of the industry, a projection of what Renata and the world expected her to be. But where was the real Isabella? The girl who wrote songs in her bedroom, dreaming of connecting with people through her music? When she arrived at the meeting, Renata was already waiting in the conference room, surrounded by record label executives. The bright lights, the folders with contracts and proposals, everything seemed perfect, as always. Renata flashed her a confident smile, but something in Isabella's eyes had changed. "Are you ready for this?" Renata asked, as if the answer were already a given. Isabella swallowed, feeling a new determination forming inside her. For the first time in a long time, she knew what she had to do. "Renata, we need to talk," she said, her voice steadier than she had expected. The silence that followed was heavy. Renata looked at her, surprised, but before she could respond, Isabella realized that the moment to take control of her life had arrived. Isabella faces Renata for the first time, knowing that this conversation could change the course of her career. The consequences of what she's about to say will mark a before and after in her life. After that meeting with Renata, Isabella felt as if something inside her had irreparably shattered. The words she had spoken in that conference room echoed in her mind, but the weight of what she had done didn't settle in immediately. With each step she took away from the record label's office, it felt like an abyss was opening beneath her feet. The executive stares, the surprised expression on Renata's face. Everything indicated that things would never be the same again. Isabella had faced Renata for the first time. She had told her she needed space, that she couldn't keep submitting to her rules and the industry's demands. It had been a moment of bravery, yes, but also of deep fear. Renata had reacted with an unsettling calm, simply smiling and saying, "Do what you think is best for you." But Isabella knew Renata well enough to sense that smile hid something. She knew repercussions were coming. The following days were a mixture of emptiness and liberation. Isabella had cancelled all scheduled meetings, recording sessions, and interviews. She couldn't bear the constant scrutiny of the media or the inhumane pace the industry imposed on her any longer. She had retreated from the world, hiding in her apartment, but the solitude was overwhelming. The silence of her home, which had once provided a peaceful refuge, now suffocated her. The TV was off, her phone on silent mode, and the walls of that luxurious apartment seemed to close in on her. Sitting on the floor of the living room, surrounded by song lyrics she had written but never recorded, Isabella felt a deep void. The words that had once inspired her now seemed hollow, devoid of meaning. Her passion for music, which had been her reason for being, had vanished. In the midst of that emotional chaos, she received an unexpected call. It was Vitor. Despite everything, he was still her manager and friend, and he hadn't stopped worrying about her. "Isabella, I know you're going through a hard time, but you need to get out of there," Vitor said, his tone gentle yet firm. "Being alone isn't going to help. You need to reconnect with music, with what's always moved you." "I can't, Vitor," Isabella replied, her voice breaking. "I don't feel anything. Music isn't what it used to be for me. Everything has changed, and I don't know if I can get it back." Vitor sighed on the other end of the line. He knew Isabella was at her lowest point, but he also knew giving up wasn't an option. "Remember why you started this. It wasn't for fame or for Renata. It was for your love of music. You've let everything else consume you, but the essence is still there. You just need to find it again." Vitor's words hit her hard, but Isabella wasn't ready to face that reality. She had been dragged so far from the path she had dreamed of that she no longer knew how to find her way back. However, something in what Vitor had said made her think. Was it possible to feel that love for music again, that fire that had driven her since she was a teenager writing songs in her bedroom? Days passed slowly, each one longer and emptier than the last. Isabella tried writing again, but the words wouldn't come. She tried playing her guitar, but the chords sounded distant, cold. Everything that had once been her refuge now felt like an obligation. Music, which used to be her escape, her way of expressing what she felt, was now a source of pain. One afternoon, while watching the rain hit the window, she received a message. It was from Leo. Isabella hesitated for a moment before opening it. Since Leo's betrayal, they hadn't spoken. She wasn't sure if she was ready to face that conversation, but her curiosity got the best of her. "Isabella, I need to talk to you. I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. Please, give me a chance to explain," the message read. Isabella read it several times, feeling a mixture of anger and sadness. She knew Leo had been one of the key pieces in her downfall, but she also knew that, somehow, she needed to close that chapter. She put the phone away without responding, but Leo's words stayed with her. Was there really an explanation for what he had done? Could she forgive him? And more importantly, could she forgive herself for letting things go this far? That night, after days of isolation, Isabella decided to take a walk. The streets were wet from the rain, and the city seemed quieter than usual. With her hood up, she walked aimlessly, trying to clear her mind. The loneliness she felt wasn't just because of her withdrawal from the industry. It was also because of her disconnection from herself. Suddenly, she passed by a small cafe where local musicians used to play. She stopped at the door, hearing the sound of a guitar and a soft voice filtering from inside. Something about that music drew her in, and without thinking too much, she walked in. She sat at a table in the back, away from the few people who had shown up that night. The musician on stage sang with a passion that felt familiar, a passion she herself used to have. The lyrics were simple but full of emotion, and for the first time in a long time, Isabella felt a spark. Something inside her stirred as she listened to that live music. Raw, unfiltered, no big production, just pure emotion. When the song ended, Isabella realized she was crying. But they weren't tears of sadness, they were tears of relief. That night, in that small cafe, she had found a glimpse of what she had lost. The music was still there, waiting for her to come back to it. Isabella decides it's time to return to her roots, to reconnect with music in a more authentic way. But she knows that to do so, she will have to face more painful truths and make decisions that will change her life forever. The weeks following her visit to the cafe were a slow but steady awakening for Isabella. Something inside her had changed that night. Music, which had once felt so distant, was slowly returning to her life, but in a different, purer form. Yet, the ghosts of her past still haunted her. Her confrontation with Renata and the music industry wasn't over, and she knew it well. To reclaim her freedom, Isabella would have to make difficult decisions, ones that could risk everything she had built. The first sign that something was about to happen came in the form of an email from her public relations team. It outlined a plan for a media campaign designed to repair her public image after weeks of speculation and rumors. However, as she read it, Isabella felt a knot in her stomach. The entire plan revolved around the same formula Renata had always used. More interviews, more controlled photos, more adjustments to her image, without mentioning any of the painful truths Isabella had been living. Sitting in front of her computer, with the cursor blinking on the screen, she knew she couldn't continue down this path. She was tired of the lies, tired of the masks she had to wear to please the industry. What she truly wanted was to be herself, but she knew that kind of authenticity had no place in the world Renata had created for her. She picked up her phone and dialed Vitor's number. When he answered, she could hear the concern in his voice. "Isabella, are you okay?" he asked, knowing she had been struggling with her emotions in recent weeks. "Vitor, I need to talk to you about the future of my career," she responded, with a firmness she hadn't felt in a long time. "I can't keep going like this. Renata and her team are pushing me toward a place I don't want to go, and I feel like if I don't do something now, I'm going to lose everything. Not just my career, but myself." Vitor was silent for a moment, processing what Isabella was saying. He had been waiting for this day, but he also knew what it would mean. "I know, Isabella," he finally said, "but you also know what it means to go up against Renata. She has enormous control over your career, and if you decide to break with her, it won't be easy. There are contracts, commitments. She won't let you go without a fight." Isabella knew it. In a way, her life was tied to the industry. But she also knew that continuing like this wasn't an option. She couldn't keep living a lie, pretending to be someone she wasn't. She had spent too much time pleasing others, and now it was time to please herself. "I'm going to do it, Vitor," she said, with a determination that surprised even her. "I can't keep going down this path, and if that means risking everything, then I will." The silence on the line was heavy, but Vitor finally spoke. "I'll support you in whatever you decide," he said, his tone serious but warm. "But I want you to be prepared for what's coming. Breaking with Renata will be like declaring war. She won't sit idly by." Isabella appreciated Vitor's support, but she knew that much of what was to come, she would have to face alone. After hanging up the phone, she took a deep breath and mentally prepared for what would be the hardest conversation of her life. The next day, Isabella called for a meeting with Renata and her team. She knew there was no turning back. As she made her way to the record label's building, her heart pounded, but her mind was clear. She was no longer the frightened young woman afraid of losing everything. Now, she was willing to risk it all for something greater, her freedom. Renata was already waiting in the meeting room, surrounded by her collaborators. The same calculated smile that Isabella knew so well was on her face. Isabella sat across from her, feeling the tension in the air. She knew that the moment she said what she had to say, the balance of power in that room would change forever. "Isabella, I'm glad you decided to meet with us," Renata said, in her usual tone of confidence. "I've been thinking about the next steps to relaunch your public image. The campaign we're preparing is going to—" "Renata, stop," Isabella interrupted, her voice firmer than she had expected. "I'm not going to continue with this. I don't want to participate in any campaign. I don't want to keep living this lie." The silence that followed was deafening. Renata stared at her, her eyes filled with surprise but also something else, anger. No one interrupted Renata like that. "What are you talking about?" Renata asked, her tone colder now. "Everything we've done has been for your career, to take you to the top. To the top of something I no longer want," Isabella responded, not letting herself be intimidated. "I've lost control of my life. I'm not myself anymore. All of this image you've created, is not what I want for me. I want to get back to who I was before. I want to be myself, not what you or the industry expect me to be." Renata leaned back in her chair, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of frustration and calculation. Isabella could see her mind processing every word, searching for a way to regain control of the situation. "Isabella, you know what this means, don't you?" Renata said, her voice sharp as a knife. "If you decide to break with us, with everything we've built, your career could be over. And I'm not just talking about now. I'm talking about your entire future in this industry." Isabella felt the weight of Renata's words, but they no longer affected her as they once had. She had prepared for this moment, and she knew that any price she had to pay would be worth it if she could be free again. "I know," she responded calmly, "but I'd rather start over being who I really am than continue a career based on something that doesn't represent me." Renata didn't respond immediately. The tension in the room was palpable, and everyone present seemed to be holding their breath. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Renata stood up from her chair. "If that's what you want," she said, her voice dripping with venom, "then go ahead. But don't forget that in this world, people don't survive without allies. And you just lost your most powerful one." Isabella nodded, feeling a strange calm wash over her. She had lost Renata, yes, but she had also regained something much more important: her freedom. Now, everything that happened would depend on her decisions, on her music. As she left the building, she breathed in the fresh air as if for the first time. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace with herself. Isabella has broken ties with Renata, but now she must face the consequences of that decision. With her career hanging by a thread, she must find a new way forward, without the industry support, but with the conviction that she has reclaimed control over her life. The breakup with Renata was only the beginning of what would become one of the most challenging phases of Isabella's life. The day after their meeting, the news began to spread in the media. Headlines quickly painted her as the rebellious artist who had abandoned her career, or the ungrateful singer who had separated from her team. The tabloids had a field day with the story, and the narrative they built was brutal. Isabella was spiraling out of control. Isabella had known this would happen. She had mentally prepared herself for the media scrutiny, but that didn't make the criticism any less painful. The following days were a whirlwind of rumors, fake interviews, and attacks on social media. The same people who had once idolized her now criticized her ruthlessly. How dare she walk away from such a promising career? She's digging her own artistic grave, some said. Others speculated about her mental health, and the question of whether Isabella was okay became the most common topic of conversation. To make matters worse, many of the contracts she had in place began to fall apart. Brands she had signed deals with withdrew their offers, music platforms stopped promoting her songs like they used to, and several planned events were cancelled without explanation. It was clear that Renata had started pulling strings in the industry, ensuring that Isabella felt the full impact of her decision. Isolated and without the support of the system that had once elevated her to stardom, Isabella found herself back in a dark place. She was used to pressure, but this time it was different. This time, she was completely alone. There was no one to guide her, no one to step in and soften the blows. She had regained her freedom, yes, but at a price she had never imagined. One afternoon, after days of isolation, Isabella decided to go for a walk. The sun barely peeked through the clouds, and the city felt unusually quiet. She felt invisible as she walked through the streets, something she had longed for over the years. Yet now that she had it, that invisibility made her feel empty. She missed music, but every time she thought about recording or composing again, a deep sense of fear paralyzed her. As she crossed a small square, a group of young musicians was playing in a corner. The melody was soft but filled with energy and authenticity. Isabella stopped for a moment, watching them. They were like she had once been, young, full of dreams, playing for the sheer pleasure of it, without worrying about contracts, record labels, or popularity charts. The music flowed from them naturally, effortlessly, like an intimate conversation between the soul and the instrument. Something inside Isabella began to stir as she listened to them. Had she truly lost that part of herself? Or had she merely buried it under layers of expectations and pressure? Suddenly, she felt an almost urgent need to reconnect with that forgotten part of her life. The part that loved music for what it was, not for what it could offer her professionally. Back in her apartment, she turned on her computer and opened one of her old music files. They were songs she had written before Renata had taken full control of her career, songs she had never recorded or shared with anyone. As she read the lyrics, Isabella realized how much she had changed. The words spoke of dreams, of sincere emotions, of a young woman who only wanted to sing what she felt, without worrying about what the world expected of her. Without thinking much, she picked up her guitar. It had been weeks since she last played, and her fingers were a bit clumsy at first. But slowly, the music began to flow. The melodies were simple but loaded with meaning. The lyrics, though written at a different time in her life, now took on a new, much deeper significance. For the first time in a long time, Isabella felt like she was making music for herself, without the pressure to please anyone else. That same night, she sat in front of her computer and recorded one of the songs. It wasn't anything elaborate, just her voice and her guitar. However, when she finished recording, she felt a peace she hadn't experienced in years. She realized she no longer needed the big studios, the renowned producers, or the million-dollar campaigns to do what she loved. All she needed was her music and her truth. But she knew the next step would be the hardest: sharing her art with the world again. Doubts began to creep into her mind. What if no one listened to her new songs? What if the public rejected her now that she was no longer the star they had created? Despite everything, Isabella was determined to try. She knew her new music wouldn't be for everyone, but she also knew it would be authentic. A few days later, she uploaded the first song to an independent music platform. No promotion, no media announcements. She simply posted the link on her social media accounts with a short message: "This is who I am now. I hope you find something in these songs that speaks to you, as they have to me." The response was unexpected. At first, the reaction was lukewarm. Only a few followers commented on the post, but their comments were different. They were no longer superficial praises about her looks or fame. They were sincere words from people who connected with her music on a deeper level. Isabella felt that, at last, she was being heard for the right reasons. Over time, the song began to gain traction. Not on the big charts, but in small circles of music lovers who valued authenticity above all. Isabella realized that she had found a new path. It wouldn't be the path to massive stardom or awards, but it was a path that connected her with her art and with people who truly valued what she had to say. Isabella has found a new way to make music, but her journey isn't over. As her new music begins to resonate with a different audience, she must decide if she is ready to return to the stage, this time on her own terms. Time passed, and Isabella's music began to find its own space, far from the large platforms and commercial tours that once defined her career. Now, her work resonated in more intimate places, in small cafes, on alternative playlists, and among an audience that valued honesty more than the glitter of fame. But despite the newfound tranquility she had discovered, something was still missing. She knew that sooner or later, she would have to face the question she had avoided since breaking away from Renata. Was she ready to return to the stage? The days of her solitary life began to feel repetitive. While recording her songs and sharing them independently had given her a sense of freedom, Isabella missed the direct connection with her audience. The small responses she received on social media, though filled with love, did not fill the emptiness she felt. The absence of that spark that only a stage could give her began to weigh more heavily on her than she had expected. One morning, while checking her emails, one in particular caught her attention. It was from a local event organizer who had heard her music on one of the independent platforms. The message was brief but direct. "We've listened to your new music and would love for you to be the headliner at a small festival in our city. We know you've kept away from the stage, but we believe this event could be perfect for you. No pressure. Just you and your music." Isabella read the message several times, feeling a mix of nervousness and excitement. The offer was tempting but also terrifying. It had been so long since she'd last been on stage that she wondered if she still had what it took. The pressure from Renata and the weight of the industry were gone, but now the only person expecting something from her was herself. Throughout the day, doubts began to consume her. What if she accepted the offer and no one showed up? What if she messed up, her voice wasn't up to par, or people no longer connected with her? But on the other hand, she knew this was an opportunity to reconnect in a way she hadn't been able to for a long time. Isabella spent the night staring at the ceiling, wrestling with her fear. She knew the only way forward was to face those fears, and the only way to know if she was ready was to take the leap. The next day, she replied to the email, "I accept. Thank you for the opportunity." In the weeks that followed, Isabella quietly prepared. She didn't tell anyone, not even Vitor. She wanted this experience to be entirely her own, without external expectations. She went back to practicing her songs, fine-tuning her voice, and working on acoustic versions of her new tracks. Each rehearsal was an emotional journey. Some songs made her smile with nostalgia, while others took her back to those dark moments she had tried to forget. But she knew it was all part of her story, of her rebirth. The day of the festival arrived faster than she expected. It was a small event, outdoors, in a local park. There were no big lights, no giant screens, no hundreds of technicians rushing around. The atmosphere was calm, almost intimate. When Isabella arrived, the organizer greeted her with a warm smile, without the formalities she was used to at her old events. "Thank you for accepting our invitation," said the organizer. "We know it's been a difficult time for you, but I want you to know that here, we're all just here to enjoy the music. No pressure." Isabella nodded, feeling a lump in her throat. This was the kind of stage she had always dreamed of but had forgotten about in her race toward fame. She stepped onto the small stage with her guitar slung over her shoulder, and for a moment, everything stopped. The audience was small, just a few dozen people scattered among blankets and picnic chairs. But there was a warmth in the air, something that reminded her why she had started making music in the first place. She took the microphone, and without grand introductions, began to play the first song. The notes flowed smoothly, and her voice, though shaky at first, soon found its strength. As the song progressed, Isabella closed her eyes and let the music guide her. Every word, every chord, was a release. She was no longer singing to please others. She was singing because she needed to, because that was her way of healing. When the first song ended, the audience erupted in applause. Isabella, surprised, smiled shyly. She hadn't expected such a warm reaction, and something about that gesture lightened the weight she had been carrying on her shoulders. She continued with the next song, and then another, and another, each one more personal than the last. Songs she had written in her darkest moments, but now, in that small park, they took on a new meaning. As her performance went on, Isabella began to notice the audience's gazes. They weren't the superficial stares of those who had followed her for her fame. They were the looks of people who were truly listening, connecting with every word that came out of her mouth. There was something deeply healing in that connection, in knowing that her music, after all, could still touch the hearts of those who listened. When she reached the final song, Isabella took a moment to speak, something she hadn't done in her performances for a long time. "Thank you for being here," she said, her voice still trembling with emotion. "This last song is about finding myself again after getting lost in the noise. I hope each of you can also find your own way." The final song was a mix of hope and nostalgia, and when it ended, Isabella realized that, for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid. She had returned to the stage, yes, but this time on her own terms. It was no longer about meeting the expectations of others. Now it was about being true to herself. As she stepped off the stage, the organizer congratulated her, but it was a little girl, who shyly approached her, who truly moved her. "Can I be like you one day?" the girl asked, her eyes shining. Isabella knelt down to her level and, with a sincere smile, replied, "Of course you can. You just have to always be yourself." Isabella has taken the first step to return to the stage, but she knows the road ahead will be long. Now, with her music and authenticity as her guide, she must decide how she wants to continue her career, this time, completely free.